The world, though scarred and fractured, breathed once again. The light, no longer just a flicker, now burned steadily across the land. Yet, as the land began to heal, so did the knowledge that this peace was not permanent. The battle between light and dark was not a simple war, it was a struggle for the very essence of existence, one that would ebb and flow through time, as it always had. The woman, now known as the guardian of the light, stood in the heart of the newly forming world. Her eyes gazed into the distance, the landscape before her still recovering from the scars of the curse. She felt a stirring deep within her, a sense of urgency she could not ignore. The world was healing, but it was fragile. The shadows that had once ruled had not been entirely vanquished. The entity, now weakened, was a distant presence, but it would not remain dormant forever. The whispers that had once been the voice of the curse were now becoming something else, a warning. Faint echoes of the past, the lives lost and the battles fought, were now woven into the fabric of the land. They were memories, yes, but also lessons. And these lessons were not just for the guardian to learn. They were for all those who had emerged from the void. The souls that had risen with her, once fragmented and scattered, now stood by her side. They were not just specters, they were her allies, her fellow warriors. Together, they began to rebuild, their combined strength infusing the land with a new energy. The trees that had once been mere ashes now began to reach toward the sky again, their branches strong and alive. Rivers that had run dry now pulsed with vitality. And in the distance, the mountains, once choked by darkness, stood tall and proud, their peaks piercing the sky once more. But as the land healed, so did the shadows stir. The entity, retreating into the deepest corners of the void, gathered its strength. It had learned much in its defeat, its rage fueling its growing hunger. The light had not destroyed it, it had merely forced it to retreat. And in the void where darkness reigned, it began to plot its return. The woman, standing at the edge of the newly formed world, felt its pull. She knew that it was not over, that the entity would rise again. But she also knew that the land had changed, that hope had taken root in ways that the curse could not undo. As the first true nightfall in what seemed like forever descended upon the land, she closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her. The energy of the world was alive, and for the first time, it was in balance. The forces of light and dark were no longer enemies, but eternal companions, each serving their purpose in the cycle of life. But that cycle, she knew, was never without struggle. The stars above twinkled like distant whispers, and she understood the message they carried: the curse would not be defeated in one battle. The world would always be caught in the push and pull of light and darkness. It was the nature of existence. Her role was clear. She would stand as a beacon, a protector of hope, against whatever the shadows might bring. The entity, though weakened, was not finished. But the world had changed. Hope had been woven into the fabric of reality, and no force, no matter how dark, could erase it completely. The battle would continue, but the light would always rise again. And as long as the guardian stood, the world would always have a chance to heal, to fight, and to remember that even in the darkest times, there was always light to guide the way. The cycle would go on. But it would no longer be a cycle of endless despair, it would be a cycle of rebirth. The years that followed were both peaceful and turbulent. The light, though no longer as brilliant and blinding as the moment it first tore through the darkness, remained a steady presence, a beacon in the heart of a world still fragile. The guardian and her allies worked tirelessly to restore what had been lost, to rebuild the cities, the forests, and the lives that had once thrived before the curse. Yet, with every step forward, they remained ever vigilant, knowing that the shadows were never far, always waiting for their chance to rise again. In the quiet hours of the night, when the moon hung low in the sky, the guardian often found herself standing alone at the edge of the land, looking toward the horizon. Her heart, though filled with hope, carried the weight of a truth she could not ignore. The entity, though weakened, still existed. It had retreated into the dark corners of the world, biding its time, gathering power in the void. It was during one such moment of reflection that the whispers returned. At first, they were faint, carried by the wind like the remnants of a forgotten dream. But soon, they grew louder, more insistent, as if the shadows themselves were calling to her. She could feel the pull again, the familiar ache deep in her chest. It was not just the entity calling out to her, it was the very fabric of the world, torn and frayed at the edges, whispering its need for balance. The light and the dark had always been inextricably linked, bound together by an ancient, unspoken pact. And now, that balance was threatened once more. The guardian knew what she must do. With a deep breath, she turned away from the horizon and returned to the heart of the world. Her allies, those souls who had risen with her, stood ready. They had sensed the change as well, felt the stirrings of darkness creeping once again into the land. There would be no more hiding, no more waiting. The battle was coming, and this time, it would not be just a fight for survival. It would be a fight for the soul of the world. As the days passed, the world seemed to hold its breath. The land, still healing, had become a place of quiet beauty, a testament to the resilience of life. But beneath the surface, the shadows stirred. The darkness was patient, like a hunter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when it came, it did not strike with the ferocity of the past, but with a subtlety that made it all the more dangerous. The entity's power was no longer as overwhelming as it had once been. It had learned from its defeat, evolved, adapted. It no longer relied solely on fear and despair to fuel its strength. It had discovered new ways to feed on the cracks in the world, on the doubts and insecurities that lingered in the hearts of those who had survived. The Guardian and her allies stood at the ready, but they knew that this time would be different. The light, though stronger than before, would not be enough to defeat the entity once and for all. They needed something more, something that transcended the old cycle of light and dark. The Guardian stood at the center of their gathering, her voice steady but filled with determination. We cannot defeat the darkness by fighting it with the same tools it used against us. We must heal the wounds it has left behind, not just on the land, but in the hearts of those who have suffered. The other figures, once fragmented souls, now stood as one, a united front, their strength drawn not just from their light, but from their shared experience, their shared pain. They had known despair, but they had also known what it meant to rise above it. We must heal this world together, the Guardian continued. We must restore the balance by mending the broken pieces, by facing the darkness within us all. And so, the battle began anew, not with swords or fire, but with an act of courage and unity. The Guardian led her allies into the heart of the darkness, into the very place where the entity had first begun to take shape. It was no longer a battle of light versus dark, it was a battle of understanding, of confronting the very essence of what it meant to be alive. In the end, the darkness did not fade. It would never truly disappear, for it was a part of the world, as much as the light was. But the world had learned to live with it. The shadows could no longer consume everything. The light, though not blinding, had become a steady, unyielding force. The cycle of light and dark would continue, but it would no longer be a struggle for domination. It would be a delicate dance, a balance that would shift and evolve with each passing day. And as the Guardian stood once more at the edge of the world, looking out over the land she had helped to heal, she knew one thing for certain. The world would never be perfect, never free of darkness, but it was alive. And as long as there was life, there would always be hope. The fight was not over, but the light in all its quiet strength would endure. The world, though forever marked by the scars of its past, had found its rhythm. The balance of light and darkness had become part of its very essence. The Guardian, no longer just a symbol of hope but a living testament to the strength of those who refused to surrender, had found peace in knowing that the journey was never truly about vanquishing darkness entirely. It was about embracing the complexities of existence, both light and shadow, and learning to live with them. As the years passed, the healing continued. The cities that once lay in ruin were now thriving, filled with life and laughter. The forests, reborn from the ashes of the curse, stood tall and proud once more. The rivers, clear and flowing, reflected the sky in all its vivid colors. And the people, once fractured and lost, now stood united, their hearts strong from the trials they had endured. Yet in the stillness of the night, when the wind whispered through the trees and the stars shone brightly above, the Guardian could still feel the faint presence of the shadows, quiet, lingering, but no longer oppressive. They were not gone, and perhaps they never would be. But they were no longer the all-consuming force they once were. They had learned, just as the world had. The souls who had risen with her, those who had fought beside her, continued to guide and protect the world in ways both seen and unseen. They had become more than memories. They had become part of the very fabric of existence, watching over the world with quiet vigilance, ensuring that the balance remained. And as the Guardian stood, looking out over the horizon once again, she understood. The battle was not over, and it never would be. But the world had found a new way to exist in harmony with both the light and the dark. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant care and attention. It would not always be easy, but it would always be worth it. For as long as there was life, there would be hope. And as long as there was hope, the darkness could never truly claim victory. And so, the Guardian watched as the first light of dawn broke over the world. A world forever changed, forever scarred, but forever alive. The cycle of light and dark would continue, but now it was a dance, not a war. A dance of life, of growth, and of rebirth. In the distance, the shadows still stirred as they always would. But they were no longer a threat. They were simply part of the world's story, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance for light to return. The Guardian smiled softly, knowing that the fight would never be over, but as long as she stood, the light would always rise. And with it, the hope for a world where light and darkness could coexist in harmony. The cycle would continue, but now, it was one of balance. The dance between light and shadow, forever intertwined as time wove its tapestry, the world continued its quiet transformation. The struggle between light and darkness, now understood as a necessary part of existence, shaped not just the landscape but the very souls of those who lived in it. The Guardian, once a solitary figure bearing the weight of the world's hope, was no longer alone in her mission. Communities had formed, drawn together by the shared understanding that they must walk the tightrope between light and dark. Children, born after the great upheaval, grew up with stories of the war, of the cursed times and the battles fought. But they did not know the fear that once gripped the world. They knew only peace, and though they had heard whispers of darkness in the corners of the world, they lived in the light, nurtured by those who had fought so hard to protect it. The Guardian now spent her days walking among them, a symbol of the past but also a bridge to the future. The scars of her battle had faded with time, but her wisdom, hard-earned and timeless, had not. She shared it with all who sought it, guiding them as they rebuilt the world, one step at a time. The people began to understand that light and darkness were not separate forces, not enemies locked in a battle for supremacy. They were aspects of a greater whole. The world was not simply made up of light or dark, but both, each serving its purpose. One could not exist without the other. It was in this balance, in this interwoven dance, that the strength of the world lay. The darkness, once the embodiment of despair, had now taken on a new form. It was no longer an overwhelming force that threatened to consume everything in its path, but a quiet shadow that reminded the world of its fragility. It had become part of the cycle, its presence no longer feared but respected. And so, the shadows that moved across the land were no longer seen as a threat but as a reflection of the complexity of existence. But even as peace settled into the world, the Guardian knew that true harmony would never come without vigilance. For in the heart of every soul, there remained the potential for both light and darkness to rise. The people, too, carried within them the echoes of the past, the fear, the loss, and the pain. These memories were not to be erased but embraced. It was only by acknowledging the darkness within that one could fully appreciate the light. The cycles continued, days and nights, seasons that ebbed and flowed. The mountains still stood tall, the rivers still ran, and the forests continued to grow, though the land had changed. And the Guardian, though no longer a lone warrior, still stood as the protector of balance, ever watchful, ever ready. She knew that the peace they had built was fragile, a thing that could slip away like sand through fingers. But she also knew that it was not the strength of the light alone that held the world together. It was the wisdom to understand the need for both light and dark, to live with them in harmony. The journey would continue, generation after generation. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt. The shadows would shift and change, as shadows do. But as long as the people of the world remembered the lessons of the past, as long as they understood the need for balance, they would endure. And as long as the Guardian walked beside them, the light would always have a place in the world. For in the end, it was not about defeating the darkness, it was about learning to live with it, to dance with it. The shadows, too, had a role to play, one that could not be ignored or destroyed. They were the reflection of all that was, and in their quiet presence, they reminded the people that light was most powerful when it shone in the midst of darkness. The cycle would continue, forever intertwined. The light would rise, and the shadows would fall. And the world would live on, ever shifting, ever changing, but always alive.